Okay, welcome to Module 2, Risk Assessment. So what are we going to cover in this module? We are going to cover what is a risk assessment, who should carry out a risk assessment, identify the hazards, decide who might be harmed and how, evaluate the risk and decide on controls, record your findings and review and update the risk assessment. So these are going to be our learning outcome for module 2, risk assessment. Now, what is a risk assessment? A risk assessment is the process of assessing the risk to workers' safety and health from workplace hazard. It is an examination of all aspects of work that considers what could cause injury or harm, whether the hazard could be eliminated, and if not, what control measures are or should be in place to control the risks. So what's the difference between a hazard and a risk? A hazard can be anything that has the potential to cause harm, as opposed to a risk, which is the chance or high or low that somebody may be harmed by the hazard. Now, who should carry out a risk assessment? The employer is responsible for risk assessment within a workplace, meaning that it is their responsibility to ensure it carried out. So an employer can appoint an appropriate individual to carry out a risk assessment on behalf of the organization, as long as they are competent to do so. Now, what are the 5 steps to assessing risk? Step 1, identifying hazard and those at risk. What is the potential to cause injury or ill health? Step 2, we've got to decide who might be harmed and how. Step 3, you've got to evaluate the risks and decide on precautions. Step 4, make sure you record your findings and you have to implement them. And step 5, review your risk assessment and make sure you update them if necessary. Now we're gonna go step by step explaining how it works. Step 1, identify hazard and those at risk. So work out how people could be harmed. Here are some tips to help you identify the ones that matter the most. So how do you identify those hazards in your organization? So you, the manager or the person responsible, you've got to make sure that you walk around your workplace and look at what could reasonably be expected to cause harm. So it's always important to interact with the employees. That's why you, as a manager or a person responsible, make sure you have a good relationship with your employees. Ask them or their representatives what they think about any hazard that can cause in the working environment. So make sure you check record, get advice, review, code. Step 2, decide who might be harmed and how. So for each hazard, you need to be clear about who might be harmed, how they might be harmed, and what type of injury might occur. Okay. Step 3, evaluate the risk and decide on precautions. Having spotted the hazard, you then have to decide what to do about them. The law requires you to do everything reasonably practicable to protect people from harm. Consider the following: can I get rid of the hazard altogether? If not, how can I control the risk so that harm is unlikely? Step 4, record your findings and implement them. Writing down the result of your risk assessment and sharing them with your staff encourage you to do this. Now, if you are fewer than 5 employees, you do not have to write anything down. So you need more than 5 employees in order for you to record your findings and implementing them. Step 5, make sure you review your risk assessment and update if necessary. The risk assessment should be reviewed regularly to ensure that the risk of staff being harmed by work-related violence has not changed and that no further control measures are needed. It should also be reviewed if any changes occur in your business that may increase the risk of violence. Example, lone working, business changes in the nature of the work you do. So remember, there is no legal time frame for when you should review your risk assessment. It is at your discretion to decide when a review is deemed necessary. For example, you bring your equipment. You've got to review your risk assessment. Any substances and procedures could lead to new hazards. Now, risk assessment is a working document, and as your business experiences change, this information should be recorded and updated. So how do you identify the hazard? What is a health and safety hazard? A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm or damage or have an adverse effect on a person or people. Many people confuse the word hazard and risk, as explained before, especially in relation to occupational health and safety. So let me say it again. The risk or level of risk is the likelihood that a person may be harmed or experience an adverse effect if they are exposed to a hazard. So that's what a risk is, the likelihood that a person may be harmed or experience an adverse effect if they are exposed to a hazard. In other words, it is the likelihood that a hazard will have a negative impact on individual health and safety. Now, what is a health and safety hazard? Health and safety hazard can come from a variety of sources. Hazard can be substances, materials, processes, and practices that can cause harm. Now, the most common health and safety hazards are, we've got chemical and dust hazard. It's an example, a cleaning product, pesticide, asbestos, etc. Biological hazard, for example, insect, pests, communicable diseases. Okay, we have ergonomic hazard, for example, repetition, lifting when you're lifting heavy things, awkward postures, for example, when you're sitting on the chair, working on the computer for long, that can affect your back. That's economic hazard. And we have work organization hazards, things that cause stress. For example, workload that can cause stress. We have safety hazard, slip, trips and falls, and faulty equipment. We have the physical hazard, that noise, depending where you work. If you work in some factory where you have a lot of machineries, then I'm sure you experience that kind of noise. Temperature extreme, for example, you work in the kitchen, and especially during summertime in the United Kingdom, it gets very hot sometimes, so you can experience this temperature extreme. So we're going to talk about the most common health and safety hazard one by one. So we start with biological hazard. Biological hazard, often referred to as a biohazard, can be any biological organic substances that have the potential to cause harm or pose a threat to a person's health. You may be exposed to biological hazard if you work with animals, people, or infected plants. A biological hazard can have adverse health effect and in extreme circumstances can result in death. Biological hazards can be found in a variety of workplaces, including hospitals, schools, care homes, farms, and within the food industry. So, an individual can be exposed to a biological hazard by having contact with any of the following: blood and other bodily fluid. For example, when you work in a hospital, you have to deal with blood and other body fluid, fungi, mold and yeast, bacteria and viruses, animal and bird droppings, environmental specimens such as plant or soil, biological toxins and venoms, insect bite, rubbish, wastewater, and sewage. Now, next we speak about chemical hazard. Chemical hazard are hazardous chemicals that can be in the form of a solid, liquid, or gas. Some chemicals are more hazardous than others, and they can result in a huge variety of health and physical effect, including skin irritation, breathing problems, respiratory systems irritation, and blindness. Chemical hazard may be present in the following product: cleaning product, paint and solvent, pesticides, glues, gases such as acetylene, propane, carbon monoxide and helium, vapors and fumes, flammable materials, heavy metals such as aluminium, mercury and lead, petroleum products. Next, we speak about physical hazard. Physical hazard cannot always be seen or touched. There can be any factor or condition of the environment that can harm a person even if they do not touch them. So people in variety of environments can be exposed to physical hazard, including construction, demolition and excavation, as well as those who spend long period outside. Now, some example of physical hazard include height, loud noises, radiation, high exposure to sunlight or ultraviolet rays, extreme temperatures, fires, body stressing from repetitive or strenuous work, confined spaces with poor ventilation or contaminant, electricity including electric shock and vibration. Now, next we speak about economic hazard. Economic hazard are a result of physical factors such as body positions, the type of work you are undertaking, and any working condition that can put a strain on your body. That's what we call economic hazard. Now, these hazards are often related to manual handling and can be found in all types of workplaces. The common injuries include back injuries, upper limb or neck disorders, lower limb disorders, and damage to joint or other tissue. Poor posture, one of the economic hazards. Frequent lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling and lowering, repetitive movement, improperly adjusted workstations and chairs, awkward movement or physical effort for long period, excessive vibrations. Okay, safety hazards are hazards that create unsafe working conditions that can cause injury, illness, or even death. Safety hazard can be found in homes and workplaces across the United Kingdom. Safety hazard can cause a significant number of injuries or illnesses and can even result in death. Now, some examples of safety hazard include trip hazard such as trailing wires and cord, frayed carpet and rugs, unexpected items on the floor, slip hazard such as water or ice on the floor. Ladders, roofs, scaffolding, and high working areas can result in a fall from a height, and garden machinery that an employee can accidentally come into contact with. Damaged tools, equipment, or machinery. Electrical hazard that could cause electric shock. Burns or fires, including frayed or faulty cord or wires, missing ground pins, incorrect wiring, and overloaded circuit as shown in that picture. Areas of poor visibility, overhead power lines, and a failing object. Let me just emphasize a little bit on electric hazards. As you can see here in this picture, this could cause electric shock, burns, or fires, including frayed or faulty cord or wires, missing ground pins. So we have to avoid doing this kind of things. Let's talk about environmental hazard. Environmental hazards are substances, state, or event that can cause harm to people or have an adverse effect on their health. Now, they are usually related to the weather, temperature, and climate. They may be unpredictable or frequently changing, which is one of the reasons why they are considered hazardous. Now, some examples of environmental hazard include extreme temperatures. You see, when you travel to some tropical countries, like when you go to Asia or maybe the Caribbean or Africa, you may experience some extreme temperatures. That is one of the environmental hazard. Okay, extreme precipitation, high levels of pollution, high levels of radiation, and high levels of noise. All those are environmental hazard. Next, psychosocial hazard. Psychosocial hazard, also known as work stressor. These are hazards that can affect an employee's mental health and well-being. Now, an employee can experience both short-term and long-term effects of psychosocial hazard. For example, I can see in this picture here, the manager or the boss screaming at this poor fella here. It's very stressful. Right. Some examples of psychosocial hazard include workplace demand. When your boss, demand a lot from you, that can cause some stress. Bullying in the workplace. Workplace harassment, sexual harassment, workplace violence, workplace aggression and abuse, a lack of social support or workplace relationships, a lack of control in the workplace stresses, lack of respect in the workplace. All those examples are part of psychosocial hazard. Now, how to identify health and safety hazards. Identifying hazard is essential, very important for risk management and ensuring the health and safety of all employees and the general public. Now, both employers and employees should remain vigilant of hazard at all times and identify and eliminate them as quickly as possible. Now, some ways you can identify health and safety hazard are: make sure you inspect the workplace regularly, ensure all employees and managers are trained on health and safety and the identification of hazard. Make sure you consult employees and managers about any hazard they have identified and the best way you can manage them. Always review and inspect all equipment, machinery, tools, and vehicles regularly. Clean and maintain equipment and machinery regularly. Consult product manuals to ensure you are aware of risk and are using all equipment correctly. Investigate any health and safety incident, accident, and injuries thoroughly. Create a hazard map to mark existing and possible hazards. Identify any hazard associated with emergency procedures. Now, how can health and safety managers ensure hazards are under control? Once hazards have been identified and evaluated, it is the responsibility of health and safety managers to ensure the hazards are under control. Now, the most efficient way to eliminate or reduce hazard is by conducting a risk assessment, as we explained that before. The risk assessment are a legal requirement for any employer who has more than 5 employees. So you've got to make sure that you have this in place, the risk assessment, if you have more than 5 employees. So a risk assessment should identify any potential hazard, what risks are involved in the activity, and how these risks can be reduced or removed. A risk assessment has specific steps that should be followed. Number 1, identify hazard and any risk factors that could potentially cause harm. Analyze and evaluate any risks associated with the hazard. Number 3, determine the likelihood of harm and the severity of the potential harm. Determine who is likely to be harmed and if any individuals are more at risk than others. Determine appropriate and effective ways to eliminate, reduce, or control risks. Record all details of the risk assessment and update when necessary. Ensure every relevant person reads and signs the risk assessment. Now, why is it important to assess health and safety hazard? Assessing hazard is not only a legal requirement, you've got to remember that, but it also helps to ensure that the health and safety of everyone involved. So identifying hazard helps you to evaluate risk and the effectiveness and suitability of any existing hazard controls and risk management measures. So identifying hazard can also help you to implement any additional controls, utilize equipment or tools to reduce risk and remove hazard where possible. Identifying hazard can considerably reduce the likelihood of work-related accident, injuries, and illnesses. Now, reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulations. We spoke or covered this in details in module 1, but we're just going to repeat so that we refresh our mind. Now, regulations 4, this is the reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences regulations, RIDO 2024. Now, regulation 4 to 6 cover the reporting of work-related death and injuries other than for certain gas incident. So RIDO requires death and injuries to be reported only when there has been an accident which caused the injury. The accident was work-related. If the accident was work-related, this need to be reported. If the injury is of a type which is reportable. Now, what is an accident? So I keep repeating again so we can refresh our mind. In relation to RIDO, an accident is a separate, identifiable, and intended incident which causes physical injury. Now, these specifically include act of non-consensual violence to people at work. Okay, folks, so we're gonna pause a little bit and let us refresh our mind. So you're going to list 5 examples of injuries that are classed as accident under RIDDLE. So list 5 examples of injuries that are classed as accident under RIDDLE, and I'll see you in our next phase. Okay, I hope you have managed to list the 5 examples of injuries that are classed as accident under RIDDLE. So next, what is meant by work related? RIDDLE only requires you to report accident if they happen out of or in connection with work. An accident is work related if any of the following played a significant role: the way the work was carried out, any machinery, plant, substances, or equipment used for the work, or the condition of the site or premises where the accident happened. So, what are reportable injuries? Now, the following injuries are reportable under RIDDLE when they result from a work-related accident. So, death of any person, death should be reported. Specified injuries to workers, injuries to workers which result in their incapacitation for more than 7 days, injuries to non-workers which result in them being taken directly to hospital for treatment, or specified injuries to a non-workers which occur on hospital premises. Specified injuries to workers, this was covered in module 1. So if you want to refresh your mind, you can go back to module 1 and you see the list of specified injuries to workers. Remember, regulation 4 of RIDDLE lists specified injuries which must be reported. For example, fractures other than finger, thumbs, and toes, amputation for an arm, hand, finger, thumb, leg, foot, or toe, any injury likely to cause permanent blinding or reduction in sight in one or both eyes. So these are specified injuries to workers and they need to be reported. Okay, well done. Now we have come to the end of our module 2 risk assessment. So next is check your knowledge. We're going to be checking your knowledge. So please choose the correct answer. So the first question, what is a risk assessment? So you're going to have to pick the correct answer. A risk assessment is a process of data collection. B, a risk assessment is a process of data warehouse design. C, a risk assessment is a process of assessing the risks to workers' safety and health from workplace hazard. D, a risk assessment is a process of assessing the number of complaints in a workplace. Question number 2, who is responsible for carrying out a risk assessment? A, contractors, customers, employer, or employees. Question number 3, it is something that has the potential to cause harm to people, property, environment. Is it hazard, precaution, or risk? So you choose the correct answer. Okay, the last question. What is the first step in the process of identifying workplace hazard and persons at risk? A, implementation of risk assessment. identification of hazards, employees training. Okay, congratulations to have come so far, right? Okay, so prepare yourself for the next module 3. And in module 3 we're going to be covering workplace safety. So I'll see you in our next video. See you.